Welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. My dear friends, we have come a long way. And today I am going to tell you about the long and short of this course. And that is why I have titled today's lecture as Summary and Conclusion. We can have a brief overview of what we did, what we gained, what remained, and what finally is ordained for future. Now, this course entitled Public Speaking comprises 12 weeks, and these 12 weeks comprise 60 lectures. The entire course was divided into 12 weeks. Every week I had given a name, and again in the name there is a sub-name which actually talks about the contents of the week. Now, let us try to see what are the things that we covered, and towards the end we will also see how all these items will go a long way in your life to help you emerge as an effective, innovative, successful speaker. But before we go to discuss what we did in the weeks, let us also have a recap of what were the aims of the course. My dear friends, dear learners from every nook and corner of the country, the aim of the course was, in the beginning, to impart the knowledge of choosing appropriate subject matter and a structural organization of words, images, and sounds during public speaking. Another aim was to familiarize the learners with the concepts of not only verbal but also non-verbal communication, along with the basic knowledge of the use of technology. We also had an aim to acquaint our learners with various kinds and contexts of speech deliveries, because this entire course is dedicated to speaking, and hence we talked about speech deliveries in different situations. And once again, another aim was to provide not only the theories of different types of speaking, but also to demonstrate effective communication. My dear friends, let me admit the fact that many of our learners, many of our friends, and many of our colleagues often think that public speaking is confined only to giving speeches and giving presentations. But I actually tried my level best to provide it a broader canvas where we could also acquaint people with varieties of public speaking situation. Whether you are conversing with friends or a group of friends, or you are participating in a meeting, you are also participating in a group discussion, you are participating in interviews, you are also to prove your leadership skills, you are also to call a meeting. So, all these different situations were actually the concern of this course. Now, in order to be a successful speaker, or to say a public speaker, the various public speaking situations had to be made effective through verbal delivery, through non-verbal reflections, and then we could also focus upon how, before we go for some formal occasions where we had to speak, how one had to do some amount of research, how one had to gather data, organize the data, how one had to support, how one had to counter, what actually were the various foundations, what was the purpose, what actually could be the central theme of what one was going to speak, and finally, and not in the least manner, how we could deal with the audience. So, while one has to respond to these various situations, one also has to see how, in which manner the audience members are to be controlled. Now, we shall be having the week-wise summary, because I have given this lecture the title as Summary and Conclusion. So, the first week offered an overview of the domain of public speaking and also stressed upon the significance of communication in human life. It also threw light on the different types of speeches, different types of talks where persuasion used to be the mantra. It also focused on how listening could also impact our speaking. And then we could also see that how in professional situations, how in public situations, how in formal settings, one also had to be conscious of the role of ethics and also plagiarism in order to see that nobody is harmed, rather everybody is warmed. Nobody is warned, rather everybody is intimated. And so this week actually had a lot of focus on the rhetorics of public speaking, and then the week came to an end by establishing the relevance of public speaking as an indispensable skill. Coming to the second week, as the course started, it gained momentum, it also gained weight, it also lent learners the depth. So, in the second week, the prerequisites of public speaking were deliberated upon, where the main focus was on how to create the content creation, because it is not only to speak, rather what one speaks matters a lot. And not only the content creation is important, in the same manner as audience members are important, how one should observe one's audience's behavior and how to respond to the varying behavioral tricks of the audience members, meaning thereby how a public speaker can have the awareness of his or her audience. So, not only the creation of the content, but also the execution, where we could see how the demography of the audience mattered more than anything else, despite the fact that one created a very good content, but if one was not given ear to by the audience members, what will happen? Ultimately, it will end in a sort of fiasco, my dear friend. And then some light was also thrown on the use of technology and importance. We need not forget the fact that we are living in an age of technology where simply speaking cannot do well. Rather, we have to take into consideration the varieties of role that we have to play from one situation to another, from one venue to another, where the expectations of the people are also that the speaker has to be conversant with the use of technology. And we did that, my dear friend. Coming to week 3, where the title of the week 3 was Converting Ideas into Action. All of us gather ideas if we do not have, but the ideas have to be executed. The ideas have to be converted into action, and that action we call performative function, isn't it? So, this performative function actually can be realized well only when we are aware of the various cultures, we are aware of the diversity, we are aware of how one can have a lasting impression on the audience members. We also gave importance to the fact that before a public speaker goes and starts the delivery, he has actually to impress. He impresses to express. Unless he can control the crowd, he cannot speak well. And then one thing that cannot be denied here, my dear friends, is that majority of us, when we start speaking, and especially if we are the novice ones, the new ones who are actually trying our hands at speaking, they actually suffer from a sort of fear, from a sort of anxiety, from a sort of stress, and that we have studied under the term glossophobia. Glossophobia, nervousness you can call it in a different manner. We also could throw light on the importance of emotional intelligence in controlling this glossophobia, and we could also throw light on the positive ethos in order to outshine ourselves as a prominent, proficient, eminent speaker, my dear friends. The course moved on week after week, and it could provide you varieties. The course also took in its stride, when it came to week 4, the essential use of digression. Now, you might realize that digressions also are a must, because audience members cannot be contented throughout listening only to one thing, and the speaker has to use some nitty-gritty of digressing at times, digress to come to the main line of thinking. We also explored the earliest modes and forms of public speaking, because public speaking is not new. Rather, in this new age, it has gained a new momentum. Today we have so many things at our disposal, right from our cell phones to our computers to various other gadgets, through which we have to create a sort of balance in order to be an efficient public speaker. So we also saw how there can be relevant stages at different points of time. We could also see how, when we are going to speak, how important it is to know the throw of one's voice, how one has to interact in the classroom, outside the classroom, how one has to deal with technology, how one has to deal with culture, how one has to deal with those audience members who actually are always threatening. How can we ease the threats? How can we control? We also saw to it that effective classroom delivery is the first stage for new people to learn the nuances of public speaking. The course came to week 5th, where much amount of time was devoted to the use of non-verbals. All of you might have realized that if a speaker simply kept on confining himself behind the dais, showing no body language, showing no facial expressions, being stuck at one place, one can always think about the helplessness of the audience members. And that is why when a speaker speaks, how he can make use of non-verbals. Communication is not only verbal, it is non-verbal, it is vocal. Communication is silence, communication are pauses. Communication ignites silence, communication excites pauses in the minds of the audience members to make the content more effective. We also could see that how various types of nonverbals, namely proxemics, chronemics, haptics, meta-language, meta-communication, and other forms, how they also matter a lot and how they add to the beauty and benignity of public speaking. My dear friends, you might have all realized that even though it looks like a combination of two words, it is actually a vast world where so many things can take place only under the garb of these two words called public speaking. We actually came to week 6, and then we started focusing our attention on various types of public speaking, starting with conversation. Not everyone can be a good conversationalist. There are people who actually are frightened of conversation with strange people. But then, can we really survive in this age of today where communication is the mantra, where communication enhances, where communication ennobles, doubles people's lifespan? No man can live in isolation. Man is a living creature, and he is a man only because of his grip over language. So the lecture on conversations established the various principles and practice of healthy and positive conversation, where we could, by bringing several quotes, several messages, several examples from Edition, Steele and many other scholars, we actually tried to tell you the importance of conversation, because it is only conversation that can help you emerge a victorious negotiator. Life is full of adverse situations. You have to negotiate, my dear friend. How can you negotiate if you are not a good conversationalist? Because you have to see the sunny side. You have to see how there can be a win-win situation for both the parties. And that is why it is your art of conversation that can provide you with arguments, with evidence, with reasoning, with structural organization of your content. We could also focus our attention on recitations and elocutions. We know what we know, but do we really know what we do not know? We actually have to explore that reason, my dear friend. And that is possible only when we know elocution, where we can understand the nuances of pronunciation, we can understand the various sorts of intonation patterns, where we can talk about punctuation, even though it is practiced in writing, but when we speak, it also appears in the form of silence, pauses, and many more. Of course, we are living in an age of emoticons. But then these emoticons are confined only to your cell phones. When you speak, you are yourself going to be the emoticon with the help of your non-verbals, my dear friend. We came to week 7 and provided our audience members with the heaven and made our public speaking heavenly by talking about all the different patterns of speech, speech organizational patterns. While one is working at the content creation, how one can organize, whether it is in the cause-effect manner, whether it is in the spatial manner, whether it is in the chronological manner. And by talking about all these, we also threw light on various occasions where you have to give speeches, but not all the speeches can be given alike. There can be different situations, and situations in life change very shortly. Situations in life can change just in a jiffy, just in a moment, and one has to be ready to speak in varying situations. And that is why talking about speeches on various occasions becomes important and mandatory. My dear friends, life is full of adverse situations. There are difficulties, calamities, but speaking can provide you a sort of relief. Speaking can provide you a sort of rejoicing. And what can make you rejoice and your audience members rejoice is the careful use of humor in your talk, in your presentations. We also devoted a lecture on the efficacy of humor in conversation, efficacy of humor in speeches, in presentations. But remember, while making use of humor, one has to ensure that humor becomes relevant. Humor becomes so that even a common listener can understand the meaning that is implanted into it. We kept moving on, not running, my dear friend. We moved stepwise and entered the 8th week, where this week became especially important because here we talked about some more professional things of public speaking. And what were those professional things? We actually devoted the entire week to interviews of all sorts. Life cannot be beautiful without interviews. It is interviews that actually opens a new destiny for everyone. It actually unlocks the wisdom of the heart. And when people get a sort of livelihood, life becomes pleasant for them. That is why this week categorically elaborated upon the structure of various types of interviews, and then we also could tell them what were the preparatory steps, what were the performatory steps, what actually were the things to be done before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview, because every interview is a test of your talent, every interview is a test of your personality, every interview is a test of your intelligence, competence, and performance, my dear friends. We moved on. And then in the 9th week, we actually talked about conferences. Many of you might be thinking that can conferences also be a part of public speaking? Yes, my dear friends, of course. Today we are living in a world where we share thoughts, and we share thoughts sometimes with a small group of people, but sometimes with a large group of people. And this conference is such a platform, such an occasion where one has to understand how to organize, how to effectuate, how to participate, how to give a keynote address, how to give a plenary speech, how one has to see that one has become successful in bringing something new through the output of the conference. We also had some lectures on meeting management, where we could throw light on the purposes and functions of holding and attending meetings. Many people might be of the opinion that meetings are quite ordinary. No, my dear friends, meetings are such seatings. Sometimes we also have some types of eatings during the meetings, but then the focus is to get something new, to resolve a crisis, sometimes to execute a plan, sometimes to formulate a policy, sometimes to launch a new thing in the market, sometimes to execute what we really think, and sometimes to think about the vision of the years to come. So we also could see that how through these meetings leaders can emerge. Leaders are the Messiah, my dear friends. Not only political leaders, but leaders in academic circles also can bring a sort of vicissitudes, my dear friend. So one has to have, as a public speaker, the leadership skills. We devoted 2 lectures to leadership skills and styles, where we talked about the requirements of effective leadership, where we talked about the basic model, how a leader could be visionary, how a leader has to be collaborative, how a leader has to be go-getter, how a leader has to be committed, how a leader has to be assertive, how a leader has to see that everyone shares time fairly and not anyone is harmed, shouted upon, and not anyone is segregated, my dear friends. So we talked about the various attributes of leadership, and we could also focus on the skills, commitments, and behavioral attributes for effective leadership, which was actually based on the basic models of leadership. We proceeded to week 10th, and in week 10th, we had another important public speaking situation, and that was oral presentation. Many of you might be thinking that both the oral presentation and the speeches are alike. No, my dear friends. We actually saw to it that we could tell you the distinction between oral presentation and speeches. Prior to this, we also talked about debates. Fine. Many of you are under the impression that can debate be also a sort of public speaking? Yes, my dear friends. In order to argue, in order to counter, in order to prove your point to the best possible manner, you need debating skills. An effective speaker has to arm himself with debating skills. How one can speak for, how one can speak against, and somebody who has spoken for in the beginning, how when his turn comes, how he can rebut, because there is a time for rebuttal during the debate. How you can contradict, how you can counter the arguments of your opponents. That actually is the mantra we have understood in lectures on debating. So, when we came to week 10, this week is very important in the sense that it actually exposes everyone to the reality that one has to face, oral presentations. You may not be having the opportunity to give speeches every now and then, but if you are a professional, and most of you might be professional or waiting to be professionals, you are bound to give some presentations in the days to come. Now, what are actually the nuances of giving oral presentations, and how through your oral presentations you can convince your audience members, you can convince your bosses, your subordinates, your colleagues when you have a new plan, when you have an innovative idea which you actually want to be practiced in your organization. So, the 10th week especially focused on oral presentation, where we also talked about pre-presentation techniques, how to prepare beforehand, how much content to be had, how should we situate the various gadgets in our presentation, and how we can make use of various connectives when we are giving oral presentations, and how finally all these can prompt us to reach a conclusion where the audience members will have something as a sort of takeaway home. We also saw to it that effective modes of delivery, when one has to give a sort of presentation, when one has to speak in public, one also has to see what sort of method he or she should apply. Should he read the manuscript and leave the audience members simply waiting when this long lecture will come to an end, when the spiel will come to an end? Or should you speak impromptu? Should you practice the art of speaking impromptu, where you have not been told in advance, but you have to speak on the spur of the moment? So, we practiced various modes of delivery, and then we could also see how time could be managed, because whenever you are given an opportunity to speak, either for giving a presentation or a speech, you have to see that you maintain the dignity and formalities of time, whether you are participating in a conference or in a presentation or whatsoever. And one of the most crucial things after the presentation or the talk is how to handle questions. You have prepared well, no doubt. You are well aware of your content, you are confident of your content, but remember, questions may come from any corner and questions may be threatening at times. Do you know the art of handling questions without shouting at anyone, without dodging the questions, without escaping the questions? In the lectures that followed, various prerequisites of making use of visual aids, sometimes audio visuals, sometimes visuals, sometimes your selection of graphs, charts, circles, whatsoever, how you could situate it in your presentation, we could also see, and we also focused on various types and its effective uses. My dear friends, if the entire content were simply read out without providing some breather to the audience members, the presentation would become a big bore. It would actually end in a sort of fiasco. And that is where lies the importance of bringing connectives. These connectives actually help. And we also explained how many connectives were there and how many connectives can be used in one sentence, how one can bring a sort of twist or a turn, or how one can change the content, and how we can also indicate the audience members as to where the speaker is. So, this is why connectives also are very important, and we deliberately spoke on connectives. After having lectures of week 10, we are actually proceeding towards the end, towards the destination, and that was week 11. But before reaching the destination, we actually have to pack up. How to pack up, my dear friend? You can pack up your thoughts with the patterns of language, my dear friend, and we specifically devoted some lectures on the effective use of language, where the speaker can have his or her choice of words, where he could also see how he could structure his sentences, how he could structure his paragraph by lending unity, logic and coherence to all the sentences, how one could bring certain changes by providing some sort of transfer stations. That was also discussed, my dear friends. We also had a lecture on creative thinking. My dear friends, unless and until somebody is creative, one cannot be a public speaker. So there is immense potential in creativity to prompt you towards becoming an effective public speaker. So several concepts of creativity were also discussed. And finally, week 11 came to wrap up by having some thoughts on criticism. As a public speaker, you must be aware that at times people criticize. What sort of criticism? How you are going to be moved? Second, or how you are going to be assured? How you are going to improvise upon when you come to the next time to give speech? That actually lies in the way you take criticism. So how to handle criticism and how to take some takeaways from the feedback of your audience members that actually were also discussed in this week. We finally came to week 12. And the moment we started week 12, many of you might have started having the last laugh that finally the course is coming to an end. My dear friends, the course will come to an end, but it will provide you some means. It will not provide a sort of ending, but it will provide a sort of beginning for you that is actually new tomorrow. The last week elaborated upon the etiquettes and mannerisms, because in public speaking, not only the content, not only the credibility, not only technology, not only voice, not only vocabulary, but also important is the use of etiquettes and mannerisms. Because, as I have been saying, situations change very fast. We are actually to speak sometimes with the help of technology. Sometimes we have to have online interactions. Nowadays, in the last 2 years, you might have seen the importance of online teaching, online learning, online meetings, online conferences. How one must learn and how one must arm oneself with the several nuances of facing online interactions and bringing remedies to the challenges that are posed in online interactions. One thing that was very important in the last week was, and that all of us and all of you rather will cherish, nourish and flourish with, was actually the demonstration of some interviews. We talked about the theories, the guidelines, fine, the do's and don'ts, but we could also provide you a sort of mock interview for 3 situations: a group interview, a personal interview and a panel interview. And you could also compare how these interviews were conducted and how the candidates behaved. So this rather should be a sort of enriching experience for all of you, my dear friends. Ultimately, the course came to an end by giving a sort of exploration into the 3 pan-global ceremonial speeches, where we talked about at least 4 or 5 speeches, and we analyzed once again. We tried to demonstrate how when one speaks, when one creates, when one delivers, how one can take hold of language by making effective use of rhetorics, of repetitions, of anaphoras, of parallelisms, of short phrases, of run-on lines, and also of effective delivery. My dear friends, after sample speeches, we also spent some time on analyzing these sample speeches, and all these sample speeches were by most eminent people whose speeches have created a lot of revolution, a lot of changes, a lot of new ideas which have actually been given to the world and that have actually brought a change in the world, not only in our own country but outside as well. My dear friends, as I told you in the beginning, that this lecture has been titled as conclusion, but I do believe that life cannot draw conclusions. But then somewhere or the other we had to end the course. The course comes to an end, but then I believe there are no beginnings, there are no ends. In the end is the beginning, and in the beginning is the end. Even though the course comes to an end, but it is going to be a new beginning for you. I am quite hopeful that all the lectures of the course will provide you some food for thought and inspire you in the days to come to deliver some very effective speeches. And once you have given some very effective speeches and presentations and interviews, you will find that the course was worth doing as I had promised, my dear friends. So before we end, let us actually end with a beautiful quote by Jonathan Lockwood, a philosopher of happiness and a writer of many books, who says, "Celebrate endings, for they precede new beginnings." My dear friends, I do hope that you will also celebrate this ending, because it is going to provide you with a new beginning, with a new tomorrow, a tomorrow of hope, a tomorrow of harmony, a tomorrow of health, a tomorrow of happiness. That actually was the main intention behind formulating this course. And finally, we see and you all realize that we have been able to achieve all the promises that we had made in the beginning. So let us now celebrate this ending of the course, for they precede new beginnings. Thank you very much.